At MCCDC, we have always believed in the priesthood of all believers, and many churches proclaim the priesthood of all believers. We want to put that into practice as we have through the years with our guest preacher today, a former recipient of the Jim McCann Award, one who has touched many lives, one who has been a teacher and a priest, one who has brought love, one who has brought care and compassion. She's relocated to Providence, Rhode Island, and works in Boston with a long commute, and we're thankful that she made even a longer commute for this weekend to be with us here at MCCDC for our 48th anniversary. Let us give a great big MCCDC welcome to Kathleen Carey.
So good morning, everyone. It's so fun and wonderful to be back here at my most deepest and most favorite spiritual home. Although I have a new one, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This one stays deep in my heart. Thank you, Bobby Joe, for that. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for that. So this morning, Pastor asked me, what was my title of my speech, my talk to you this morning? What was it going to be? And I said, imagine acceptance. It just sort of came to me kind of quickly. But before we talk about that, I do have to say one funny thing. I have written here on the top of my sheet, must give a shout out to the Herculean effort that went into the maker of Zoe. And I thought it was pretty funny that Pastor used the exact same adjective. If any of you were here last night, and for those of you who were involved in the show yesterday in the drama ministry and are here this morning, you are truly amazing, because there was an unbelievable effort that went into that production, and it was so fabulous to see so many people involved, and I kept turning page after page after page with everybody playing two parts and working the set and creating this, turning the sanctuary, if you weren't here, turning the sanctuary into a street scene of Washington, D.C. It was really pretty incredible, and it was lovely to sit and see the sanctuary transformed into a dinner theater. So thank you for that, and thank you, Pastor Dwayne and Kathy and Reverend Jason, for the invite to come back to DC. We bring greetings of chilly, cold, rainy weather from Boston, and it's so nice to be here. And it's going to be 90 degrees today. I haven't felt that in months and months, so Beth and I are really grateful for the opportunity to come in and join you here this morning. So I was a member here for more than 20 years, and my new home is with the Old South Church in Boston. But I sort of split that time between there and the Catholic Church that I grew up in, because also living in Providence is my 88-year-old mother, for whom the church is sort of the center of her life and has been for many, many years. But my journey to MCCDC, therefore, started there at that Catholic church, St. Raymond's. I went to St. Raymond's School for 8 years in a cute little uniform, and taught my nuns in full habit, Dominicans, the Order of Preachers. And it gave me the moral compass that I think I needed, that I think people need in this life. But it also reminded me, and as I got older and older, this message became clearer and clearer, that I was not really one who was fully accepted by the Catholic Church. And I went through a period of time where I was sorely disillusioned by what I felt was a real contradiction in the teachings of Jesus and in the way that the Catholic Church treated so many people. I struggled with that for a long time. I stayed with church through my high school years, a little bit into my college years, but once I was out of my family's home on a regular basis, I felt a little bit bolder, and so I announced to my family that I was not going to be going to Catholic Mass, and that was quite heretical at the time. But it started me on a long journey to find a new spiritual center. I felt that even though I wasn't going to Mass on Sundays and I wasn't a full participant anymore in the Catholic Church, that the teachings of Jesus were always still most important in the center of my life. I did a year of service when I graduated from the University of Rhode Island, and those of you who are in your 60s may remember that we had a pretty vibrant program called Vista Volunteers. And my father was appalled that I would work for a year without any money. He didn't quite understand that, having struggled as he did throughout his life to make enough money. But it was the Jesus's teachings in a real life setting, in a way that I could apply those spiritual teachings of selflessness, of giving to others, of assisting others when I had so much to be thankful for and so much that I felt like I could give. And so I made the silly suggestion to them when they asked me what part of the country I would like to be in, and I said, well, never having been on a plane and never having gone west of the Mississippi River, I said, well, I'd really like to be in the Midwest or the West Coast. And they looked at that and said, Midwest? Somebody actually volunteers to be in the Midwest. We're sending her there, to Wichita, Kansas. So I ended up actually in a little town in northwest Kansas called Goodland, and I worked with persons who were part of what was called the migrant stream that came up from Mexico and Texas up through the fields where they grew, and I had never even seen a sugar beet, but they grew sugar beets, and that migrant stream then followed the crop up through Nebraska into the Dakotas. True migrants, as they call them, then traveled into New York, and then down the East Coast to Florida, following the crops, and then did that same circle. Many people living in, literally, chicken coops, basements, abandoned schools. And I was working with the Kansas Department of Health, and they had a migrant health outreach program. So, while I was in Kansas, and I'd almost forgotten this, I did start attending the Catholic Church there, and I taught Sunday school for a little while there. So I was never very far away from my religious sort of basis, but I struggled to find a place where I was welcomed and comfortable. And it was while I was a Vista volunteer that I had a relationship with a woman, and I realized that maybe what I thought was the path for me was not going to be the path that I would be following. But that only distanced me even more from my Catholic roots. So, fast forward a number of years, and I find myself in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who know me, you know that I've spent many years now, almost 40, as an attorney, and 35 of those years were spent here in Washington. And I still struggled during that time that I was here, early on, with finding a spiritual home. And a dear friend, the father of a dear friend, passed away, and it was one of those experiences that made me think, I know there's more than this life here on earth. I believe in a spiritual hereafter. And I need to get back to that place that helps me understand that and learn and grow in that thought and philosophy and feeling. I needed a spiritual connection, and it was missing in all those years. So I started back where I was most comfortable. St. Anthony's Parish over in Northeast DC. I worked, tried to get involved with the CYO, and the Catholic Church was still, and unfortunately remains, a place that's fairly unwelcoming to those in the LGBTQ plus community. But I tried there. I tried the Basilica, Catholic University. I tried the Mission up in Northwest DC. I tried Dignity when it was still being held over at Georgetown, and then when Georgetown decided that they didn't want Dignity on the grounds anymore, and we got kicked out to St. Margaret's Episcopal Church in Washington, it was just a series of disappointments, one after the other. And then I found this church. And I never left. It was a welcoming, inclusive, diverse group of people whose message included me in every single Sunday service. And it wasn't that I was a focus group or a special ministry of the church or some sort of subgroup that needed. I was the church. People like me worshiping here with their partners were accepted here and found a warm, welcoming place. When I was in the 5th grade, I used to, not only did I go to Catholic church, or Catholic school rather, but periodically I would go through periods of time where I was at Mass every day, and then I would run up the hill to go to school. And in those days, this was pre-Vatican II, everything was in Latin. And I was a nerdy little kid, so I knew all the Latin responses. But of course, as you also know, there were no such things as altar girls in those days. There were only altar boys. But at the 7 a.m. Mass, there often weren't any altar boys. And I used to sit in my seat and struggle with, should I go up to the altar and help the priest with Mass? Because I knew all the responses. I knew all the Latin. I knew when to ring the bells. I knew when to bring the chalice. I knew all of that. And often we had a sexton that always looked like he'd just gotten up out of bed, and he would kind of shuffle in and down to the main altar when the altar boys were not there, and he would serve the priest. And I thought, well, if he can do it, surely I can. So one morning when that happened, I went after Mass, because I wouldn't be bold enough to just walk up without an invite. And I spoke with, because the priest that was serving that morning was what they called the children's priest, Father Stone, and he was a very sweet man, and he would have a sermon that was always geared, because we all sat together, we all came to church on Sunday morning with our class and the nuns, and we all sat together, and he would preach to us and talk to us, and I thought, certainly he will understand what I'm going to ask him. So I said, Father, when the altar boy isn't here, may I come up and help serve on the altar? And you would have thought that Joan of Arc was standing in front of him. And he said, oh, why, no, girls cannot serve on the altar. And I was mortified. But I was only there in the sacristy with the priest, and so it was okay. No one was going to find out what I had so boldly suggested was a perfectly logical solution to the way I saw things. So I toddled on up to my 5th grade class, bloodied but unbowed, and sitting in the classroom doing our work, and there was a knock on the door, and in walks Father Stone, visiting, as they sometimes did, to the children in the classroom, and had a little sort of whispering confab with Sister Charles Edward, and then turned to the rest of the class and said, I want you to know that someone, bless his heart for not completely outing me at that moment, but someone approached me, a girl, from this class about serving on the altar, and I just want to make sure you all know that that is not possible, that that can never happen, that girls are not allowed. I mean, what century are we in? Girls are not allowed to serve on the altar. So I was mortified all over again. Of course, no one really knew. I'm sure Sister Charles Edward knew who it was. But the reason for that story is that when I came to this church, one of the first things I asked to do was be able to read scripture from the altar. And I cannot tell you what an amazing feeling it was to be able to do that. And it was the most important thing to me that I felt like I had ever experienced in that spiritual journey. And the fact that I could do it, and there was a woman who was a minister, Reverend Schultes was the minister at the time here, and women were involved, and we had a diverse, racially diverse, ethnically diverse, men and women, LGBTQ plus people on the altar, in the choir, serving in every capacity, and we were the church. This was the most important spiritual event that I felt like I belonged to.
Yes.
And I have MCCDC to thank for that. Are we still relevant here in year 48? Is it really necessary to have an MCCDC where now so many churches are open and affirming? There are so many places where people are more open and affirming and forgiving and welcoming to a lifestyle that maybe 20 years ago they would never have considered being open to. I think the answer to that is yes. And it came to me loudly and clearly now that I'm back in Providence, which is where I grew up and where my mom is. And Beth and I, on those occasions when we can't get to Old South Church in Boston on a Sunday morning, we take my mother to Mass at St. Raymond's. And there's a wonderful priest there now, Father Eddie, who makes an effort, a real effort, an honest effort to be open and welcoming. All are welcome here is the banner of the church, and it's on the church, the worship guide, and we sing, all are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. And I think he means it. And I sense that he means it. And then I listened to the words of the Bishop of Rhode Island, the lovely Bishop Tobin, who asked this question when responding to the horrific sexual abuse scandal that the Catholic Church is still going through. And he tweeted, it's so appropriate that it was a tweet, I thought, "Is sexual abuse caused by gay currents in the church, or rampant clericalism, or episcopal malfeasance, or poor seminary formation, or the sinful condition of the fallen mankind? Yes, all of the above." And I thought, you haven't learned anything. How dare you? How dare you compare pedophilia to a child of God? And then Pope Benedict, former Pope Benedict, recently commented in an article that he wrote how, quote, various seminary homosexual cliques had a significant impact on seminaries, resulting in the sexual abuse scandal that the Catholic Church is going through. And I thought, you haven't learned, this church is still not accepting of everyone, of God's children. If I ever had any doubt that MCCDC, the church itself, was still relevant and was still necessary and was still a welcome and wonderful place to express your spiritual needs and wants and glory to God, no more do I have any question about that. And then I also had spent some time trying to find out whether the Methodists maybe were a spiritual home for me. And I went to the Foundry United Methodist Church here in Washington, D.C. For quite some time in between not being here for a few Sundays. And they had a pastor that preached at Foundry, and he made his life's work, he's now retired, but he made his life's work trying to get the Methodists to be an open and affirming and welcoming congregation. And then, as you all know, so recently, the Methodists passed the following: the Conference Council on Finance and Administration shall have authority and responsibility to perform the following functions: to ensure that no annual conference board, agency, committee, commission, or council shall give United Methodist funds to any gay caucus or group, or otherwise use such funds to promote the acceptance of homosexuality or violate the expressed commitment of the UMC. If there's any doubt that this church and the ministry to the GBLTQ+ community is necessary, look no farther than what the Methodists have recently told us. John 10, verses 27 to 30 says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. My sheep know my voice, and I know theirs."
Yes.
And you, each of you, follow that same shepherd, and he knows your voice, who you are, and you are a child of God. And this church celebrates every bit of that philosophy and everything that it does, and for every saint that looks down upon us from the chapel, for those that I knew who are no longer with us, Myron, Leon, Jean, Judy, for those who I didn't know but that I've heard so much about, Ford Singletary and so many others that preceded us. They are all children of God. We are all children of God. God hears our voice, and we respond, and he responds to us. So for all of you, if you ever have any doubt but that this is a wonderful place and you can find a spiritual home here, look no further than MCCDC. Happy 48th anniversary, everyone.